Some of you will know that I have another channel where I'm currently restoring a classic Mini. One of the subscribers to Smugwoodmini had seen that I had a woodworking channel and asked me if I could make him a bespoke choke peg. Manual chokes are a thing of the past now. Modern cars operate differently, but if you've ever driven a car with a manual choke, you may remember the choke not always holding its position and may have required a peg to keep it operating. When I was asked to make one, I acquired some shop-bought pegs, but the quality was poor, so I decided to make a prototype peg myself and see how it would turn out. I filmed the whole process, but I will have to add that it's not the greatest video as I'm still struggling for room, and everything is such a mess because of the car restoration work taking up all the room. And at the minute, I can barely get to the machines, which also meant using a lot more hand tools than I usually do. So to start off, I went for a better wood than the shop-bought pegs and used a piece of maple that I had from another project. I needed to use a bandsaw to trim the piece to the rough thickness that I needed. The bandsaw is currently in a really awkward place to use, and with the vacuum hoses and the nearby mess, I hardly had any room to move, so this wasn't the safest operation, and I was pretty much using my body to push the wood through the blade. Once the wood was cut to the rough dimensions, I used my thicknesser to plane it to size. Making something like this would be ideal for a CNC project, but I decided to just use a CNC for the engraving and I made the rest by hand. I used Vectric software as usual, and I used a 0.6mm end mill to cut the text. Looking back, I might have been better V-carving the text, but I had originally planned to use milliput to fill in the letters, but decided later on that it looked alright unfilled, so maybe just V-carving would have been a lot easier. I also realised once the cutting started that I'd forgotten to adjust the feed speeds, and so that the end mill was cutting faster than I was comfortable with. And whilst it did cut what it had to do, it did snap whilst trying to make a spare piece, but I half expected that to happen. So I was left to just using hand tools. I'm not set up for hand tools, I really need to get myself some basics to make things easier and safer, like a bench hook for starters. I marked out the piece with a pencil for where I need to drill or sand the material. I let myself down here as I was too lazy to clamp it all together properly, which meant that the holes weren't as accurate as I'd liked, and it also didn't help when the drill chuck fell out during operation. The drill worked well for the peg holes, but for the front divot I used a round file as it's more of an oval than a circular shape. Now I was struggling to get the vacuum hose to the sander, so initially I just used my hand to pull down the sandpaper, which did an okay job surprisingly, but I ended up having to move a few things around to get it working properly so that I could sand down the back of the pegs. Then all that was left to do was assemble the peg. I used a spring from the shop bought peg, but I made the new peg a little wider so it was less likely to come apart so easily. The end result wasn't too bad. There's a few tweaks to make, but it wasn't bad for a prototype. Hopefully the next one I make will be a little bit better.